So this video was actually recommended to me for Valentine's Day, but the person said it was a little bit late, so it's alright. It's totally cool. This is Miscellaneous Myths, Hades and Persephone, and this is by Overly Sarcastic Productions. So shout out to Overly Sarcastic Productions. If you want me to take down my video, I do not mind. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, sending out a lot of love. Let's go.
Let's not kid ourselves here. Relationships in Greek mythology are almost unilaterally really bad.
True.
Zeus and Hera get some flack for Zeus's non-stop adultering with extremely unwilling mortals, and Hera subsequently punishing the innocent mortals involved, but that's got nothing on the story of their actual marriage, which I will not be recounting here because it is so far from consensual there is no way for me to be funny about it. And far from consensual is a recurring theme in the mythos. Zeus, Poseidon, and Apollo especially tend to default to kidnapping when a pre-mortal catches their eye, sometimes combined with their whole divine shapeshifting dealio to trick or coerce those mortals into banging them. If the mortal is lucky, they survive the process.
She's not wrong. She's killing it. Right off to a great start. 33 seconds in and has not missed a beat.
And gain some superpowers or kick off a lineage of heroes. If they're not, they usually die horribly. Some of Apollo's famous lovers die tragically after a fulfilling personal relationship with him, but most of them die tragically trying to outrun him. That is straight up
I like it so far. Oh my gosh, Carmen, let's go.
and everybody knows it. Check almost any Olympian god's list of lovers, and you'll usually find at least one character who super didn't want to be on that list. Yes, even your favorite.
Whoa.
Yes, even Olympian soft boy Dionysus. And I will be
Yep.
the first to admit that I gloss over a lot of this stuff in my videos, and I do that because it makes me incredibly uncomfortable. Can you blame me? It's not like I'm the only one. I grew up with a freaking picture book that told me Zeus was a cool guy who had a lot of cool kids that did cool stuff. I watched a Disney movie about these people. I don't have an easy time reconciling the fact that these shining heroic figures that inspired so many incredible stories were characterized as absolutely garbage in several very key ways.
To be fair, the gods and goddesses and everything in the other pantheons are what you make them, so you can still take that Disney washed over version of the original stories in better light than the things that were created. Just saying. I mean, the things that happen in a mortal realm, everything is reflections of each other, so how do you expect the real myths to be?
And when I do talk about that stuff, it feels disingenuous to talk about anything else, as if that first thing isn't very much a deal breaker for finding the characters heroic or compelling. Basically, every modern retelling or reimagining of Greek mythology heavily sanitizes the stories in one way or another.
100%.
The Greek pantheon gets given the same treatment as most beloved problematic celebrities. We love it for the stories it gave us, and we pretend not to notice the part where it won't stop assaulting underage fans, because that behavior doesn't fit the image we have of it. And that's because we, as a collective audience, are primed to think of gods as good guys. And good guys don't do that kind of thing. That'd make them...
No. Wow. Your audience is primed to think that. Man. A lot of learning to do. I think the one thing that's overshadowed about gods is literally that they're both healers and destructors. Yeah, I don't know why I said it like that, but there's destroyers and creators. That's both aspects of a god.
bad guys.
Creator
And that
and
is
destroyer.
exactly why only one Greek god gets consistently held responsible for these problematic behaviors. None other than Hades, Lord
Yeah.
of the Dead and unjustified Satan analog. Because of our social biases, most of which come from a pop culture understanding of Christianity, which is the same source for our gods are necessarily good thing, a modern audience
Yeah.
starts off primed to hate this guy. Lord of the Underworld? We all know what that means. Cartoon Lucifer, King of Hell, token evil divinity, blatant bad guy, easy peasy. And he kidnapped his wife? What an asshole. No wonder nobody hangs out with this guy. Man, what a jerk. Anyway, I just love Apollo. He's the hottest thing since hotness. And isn't it tragic how many of his true loves die? Wonder where that keeps happening. When retelling or reinterpreting ancient stories in a modern context, we almost always end up cherry-picking the parts that make the most sense to our modern worldview and sensibilities, and working around the parts that suffer from the worst of the culture clash. Ancient Greece was pretty cool about a lot of stuff, but women, for example, were not on that list. So from a modern perspective, when we look back at these original tellings, it's very difficult to see Zeus doing his thing and conclude anything other than that the king of the gods is an omnipotent serial rapist who leaves a trail of shattered lives and bastard children in his wake, and this pantheon is a fucking nightmare. But that is not the perspective a contemporary Athenian would have had. It's not the impact the contemporary storytellers would have.
And it's super weird because if you know deeper about mythology and where the Greek pantheon is even based off, it's weird that it took such a twist. Yeah, it's weird because I'm just saying, like women Never mind. Like they were regarded as. It's just so weird how I don't know. I don't want to like get too deep about certain things if you don't like look into it. But you guys are queens, and the literal the. I don't want to get esoteric. There's just things.
Would have wanted to produce, and it is not the image most modern writers want to attach to their Skyfather King of the Gods hero character. The idea that gods are supposed to be good is comparatively new. For the ancient Greeks, gods were reflections of what was true rather than what was ideal or morally right. Ancient Greece was terrible to women, so that was reflected in the gods.
Yes, there we go. There we go. There, oh my gosh, that is the biggest thing that I try to tell people about the pantheons. That you're supposed to find who is Thor in your family, or who is Hades, or who has, not depending on the qualities, if they're good or bad depend on you, but like you can find these gods and goddesses in your everyday life because they're just energies. They're not literally people. They're just reflections of you.
Us and our pervasive pop culture Christianity, deities and divinity-adjacent figures are thought of more like paragons, idealized representations of goodness and virtue. So when we try and apply that moralized perspective to the Greek gods, we get some serious cognitive dissonance. So the adaptations usually end up buffing it out. Sure, in all but the most squeaky clean versions, Zeus is usually still cheating on Hera, which from our societal perspective is typically seen as a much more forgivable crime, especially if you also rewrite Hera to be as deliberately unlikable as possible, the Romans. But most of Zeus's trysts get rewritten as affairs of the heart, because those are almost universally seen as significantly less bad than the non-consensual alternative, a distinction that did not exist in ancient Greece. Among other things, ancient Greek art used a lot of stock poses to signify major story beats, and there was literally no distinction between the stock pose for kidnapping and for marriage. Same result, same concept. What registers as an unforgivable crime to our eyes wasn't even recognized in the culture it came from. This specific culture clash is pretty significant, which is why this is the part that mostly gets ignored, sanitized, or otherwise rewritten for modern audiences. I mean, unless you're Hades. Because fuck him, right? We already hate that guy on principle. There's no need to clean up his image so a modern audience will like him. In fact, maybe it's better if we make him deliberately worse, just so people know who they should be rooting against. So, with that lengthy and spicy preamble out of the way, let's talk about Hades and Persephone. Now, these two show up off and on throughout the mythology, but their best-known myth, the story of how they got married, is recounted in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, written sometime around the...
I blanked out for a bit, like I really just left Earth for a minute, because I actually love that they're like... I see two little figures, so I'm saying their channel is Overly Sarcastic Productions, because usually in person I'm really sarcastic, and I just I feel this. I can feel every little piece of the. I'm sure she's reading off a script, right? So every little piece of this is just magnificently sarcastic. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit drained. Didn't get much sleep, but I'm paying attention to the best of my abilities.
Mid-600s BCE. This is pretty much
and I really want to get esoteric, but
the only detailed source we have for this myth, although references to Persephone's abduction pop up in broad terms in the theogony and the general folklore. The hymn begins with Persephone chilling in a flower field when the ground splits open, Hades erupts from the earth in a chariot, grabs her, and dives back underground.
Love the
narrator helpfully informs us that this abduction was sponsored and ordered by Zeus, Persephone's father, because Hades was in love with Persephone, but Zeus didn't think Demeter would approve, so he told him, just kidnap her. Never fails for me. Demeter, of course, panics when she realizes Persephone's gone and tears off in a fury looking for her. Nobody has any idea where she might be until Demeter runs into Hecate, the chthonic goddess of magic, who tells her she didn't see anything, but she heard Persephone being abducted. The goddesses continue searching together and eventually seek out Helios, titan of the sun, who, from his lofty vantage point, conveniently saw everything. He tells Demeter that Persephone was taken by Hades.
You conveniently saw everything, but I mean, he is the titan of the sun, right? He'd be up in the sky just chilling.
But the blame is all on Zeus, who approved the kidnapping and gave Persephone to Hades as his wife. Wow. So this isn't really a kidnapping so much as it is an arranged marriage. Demeter is furious, but Helios tells her, hey, she could do a lot worse for her son-in-law. Hades is a pretty cool dude, and as king of the underworld, his divine domain is nothing to sneeze at. As firstborn son of Kronos, the world was his by birthright, and even if there's a bit of a delay, everyone becomes his subject eventually. Hades is basically the best husband Persephone could ever hope for, but that's pretty cold comfort for Demeter, who evidently didn't want Persephone getting married at all. She takes a bit of personal time off and disguises herself as an old woman, and ends up getting a part-time job as a nurse to the royal family of Eleusis. Fun fact, a major cult center of Demeter and Persephone that we'll talk about more later. Demeter cares for the baby prince Demophon in her own unique way, by setting him on fire. Don't freak out, it's totally cool. She's just burning away his mortality little by little, making him more and more godlike as he grows. But one unlucky night, his mother Metanira spots Demeter setting her baby on fire and freaks out, disrupting the ritual and pissing off Demeter something fierce, which at this point is becoming a running theme. Demeter reveals her true identity and orders them to build her a temple as an apology, and when they do, Demeter takes up residence in her fancy new chateau. But she's still really pissed off and sad about Persephone, so she sits back and has a nice little sulk about it for a while. It's okay, sometimes you just gotta get it out of your system. One little problem though, Demeter is responsible for all plant growth, grain, fruit, vegetables, the works, livid at the loss of her
So while she was being moody, it all died out, didn't it?
daughter. Demeter stops the plants from growing, shrouding the world in eternal winter and straight up killing quite a lot of people. Now, I think we can all agree that people are very important. After all, without people, we wouldn't have any divine sacrifices. So the Ice Age and the last
Without people, we wouldn't have any divine sacrifices. Not only that, without people, we wouldn't even have divine figures because we're the ones that put the name to them, so.
casualties draw the attention of
I mean, I didn't personally, but hey, somebody did.
Zeus, who notices Demeter seems really upset for some strange reason. He sends Iris, goddess of the rainbow, to summon Demeter, but she ain't budging. Zeus realizes this might be a problem and sends the other gods to try and convince Demeter to stop, with offerings, gifts, anything. But none of those things are Persephone, so Demeter is unmoved. Desperate to escape the consequences of his actions, Zeus sends Hermes to Hades to see if he can convince him to let Persephone return to the surface. Hermes scoots down to the underworld and finds the couple. Well, this part of the text is a little bit garbled, but basically Hades and Persephone are hanging out, and Persephone seems kind of bummed out and missing her mom. Hermes explains the whole Demeter murdering everyone situation, and Hades is like, oh balls, that doesn't sound good. Yeah, no, Persephone, absolutely go and talk to her. He also takes a minute to ask Persephone not to be sad. As his wife, she'll be a queen of queens, ruler of the dead and highest among the goddesses, and meanwhile, he will work to be the best husband he can be for her. Overjoyed, Persephone prepares to leave for the surface and see her mom again. But before we pat Hades on the back too hard, he does get worried that Persephone might never come back to him, so he sneaks her a few pomegranate seeds to bind her to the underworld. How that works exactly isn't really explained, mostly because this part of the only manuscript that preserves this hint.
Well, yeah, wait, that's a little bit weird. The only thing I could think of is if the pomegranates were grown in the underworld. So then, like, if he gave her some, since the underworld is technically like a lower realm, like if you think of Norse mythology, you think of Midgard and then Helheim. I guess if you think of literally just Earth, Gaia, and then you think of the underworld, it's a different realm. So if there's underworld pomegranates and you would give someone that, it would technically, well, I guess you would have to eat them. Wait, never mind. I actually thought about it because I've heard in certain fantasy things and the way, I really thought I was going somewhere with that, but then it got lost. Because I do understand how that would bind you to a realm, if you think about it. Like there's like the, actually, oh man, I can't spoil the Wheel of Time, so I can't say this. But you like take something, say like this was like, this pick was an ancient artifact in my room. I guess some people can see their belongings and certain things as ancient artifacts. Imagine if you were to take that kind of binds you to that person if you kind of didn't know you had. It's not getting better. I'm just going to stop. But I kind of understand. Like, if they were growing there and then, like, she kind of, like, took them and, he planted them on her and then they kind of, like, I don't know, Jack and the Beanstalk inverse her down. I'm done.
Him is actually torn. Gotta love those primary sources. Anyway, when the signal fuzzes back into focus, Hermes and Persephone are explaining to Demeter that Persephone can't permanently leave the underworld, presumably because of the whole pomegranate situation.
Oh, she did
so
eat
she'll
it.
have to split her time between Demeter and Hades. Demeter's just happy to have her back and stops the whole killing everybody thing, producing spring for the first time. Zeus, finally having the audacity to show his face, confirms that Persephone will need to spend roughly 1/3 of the year in the underworld. The exact fraction varies from telling
I wonder, do you kind of like start to see how the story explains the seasons and how like the gods are literally just reflections of the energies that happen here, spring, winter, autumn, and fall, and then you like kind of like there's spring, autumn, winter, and fall personified. Persephone personified. That's actually weird that I just realized that. Persephone personified. I don't like that I just came to that realization. Something existential awakened in me.
telling, but broadly, when she's not around, Demeter gets all bummed again and stops letting the plants grow as a fun callback to that time she nearly killed the entire planet, explaining the seasonal cycle very handily.
Boom!
Status quo for
Boom! 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 See, I do remember this a little bit.
Established, the hymn ends. Now, there's a few surprising things about this story. For one thing, the hymn itself goes out of its way to absolve Hades of all responsibility except for the pomegranate bit. Everything else is on Zeus as father of the bride and authorizer/orderer of the kidnapping. Hades as wicked villainous kidnapper is a later interpretation unsupported by the original framing. And perhaps more surprisingly, Persephone's role in the coming of spring is fully incidental. It's Demeter bringing the world back to life, which means, functionally, Persephone isn't the goddess of spring. Spring is Demeter's job. The only thing Persephone is explicitly the goddess of is the underworld. And if we go looking through the rest of the mythology, we only find more evidence for this. The Theogony refers to the couple as stalwart Hades and dread Persephone. The Iliad does the same thing. Hades gets a few anecdotes, but is mostly referred to obliquely when the text calls the underworld the house of Hades. Meanwhile, Persephone gets name-dropped as dread Persephone on the regular. In the Odyssey, when Odysseus travels to the underworld and is tormented by ghosts, he assumes
Oh my gosh, you did way too much research. Jesus.
Persephone must
good for wanting to make a video like this, but geez, the sheer amount of work is just impressive, or sheer amount of just research.
Be responsible for their actions. None of this lines up tonally with innocent flower goddess dragged into the underworld. Persephone is a straight-up queen of the dead, and if we dig a little deeper, things start looking even weirder. First of all, when we do...
But see, okay, flower, but still someone could see the dead as beautiful as well, so technically still kind of the same thing depending on how you look at it and how you shape it. But true, it's not the pretty princess, it's kind of like the queen of the dead. Yeah, but the dead are beautiful. I'm sure she believes that she's the queen of the dead.
Do our standard dive into Mycenaean records, we find that we have no actual evidence that Hades predates ancient Greece. And that's weird, because we have plenty of evidence that Demeter and Persephone do. Both of them are referenced in Mycenaean Linear B texts under various titles, including the collective Wanaso, meaning the two queens. And remember that, we'll come back to it later. Zeus and Poseidon also have clear Mycenaean counterparts, but not Hades. And that wouldn't be super weird if it weren't for the fact that the story of Persephone's descent into the underworld also seems to predate ancient Greece, and by extension, Hades. Now, just because we cannot find his name in Linear B does not strictly mean that Hades didn't exist in some form, but we do know that in the Mycenaean inscriptions we have, the role of king of the underworld was filled by Poseidon, which would have made Hades' role redundant. And Poseidon is frequently referred to collectively with the Wanaso with the epithet Wanax, meaning the king, implying that Mycenaean Poseidon, Demeter, and Persephone were worshipped together in some form of trio capacity. So even if the kidnapper figure wasn't Hades back in the Mycenaean days, Demeter and Persephone were still mixed up with the king of the dead. Anyway, the Homeric hymn is the main written account we have of the abduction myth, but it was also ritually reenacted every year at the Eleusinian Mysteries, an initiation rite for the cult of Demeter and Persephone at Eleusis. We don't know what exactly they entailed, because the whole thing with mystery cults is that they kept their exact rites secret. But the theory is that it was originally derived from an agrarian Mycenaean religious ritual that predates the Greek Dark Age. The central theme of the mystery seemed to be the three-part journey of Persephone, her descent into the underworld, staying in the underworld while Demeter looked for her, and her ascending out of the underworld to reunite with Demeter. Hades had a part in the mystery as it was practiced in ancient Greece, but if it's as old as the theory believes, Hades might not have existed when it started in the Mycenaean age. And he's not as central to the narrative structure as Persephone and Demeter. He's basically just a walking inciting incident to get Persephone into the underworld in the first place. He might not have been strictly necessary in the Mycenaean version, which is good because as near as we can interpolate, he can't have been in it, or at least not as the character we recognize later. And on top of that, the whole descent into and ascent out of the underworld thing is a very common story structure in Indo-European mythology, as we've talked about with Ishtar, and that base story format does not require an abduction. And that's not the only instance in the mythology where Hades takes a back seat. Persephone and Demeter are central to a very ancient Arcadian mystery cult that doesn't seem to factor in Hades at all. In Arcadia, Demeter and Persephone are collectively referred to as Despoinai, meaning the mistresses, which you may note is quite similar to the Linear B Wanaso Two Queens title.
Okay, so we're back to that. Okay, I'm gonna pause this video here and then cover this in another part. But okay, so far this is dope. Yeah, it's reminding me of a lot of stuff that I've already kind of read and just forgotten to time about them, but I love basically revisiting this through the eyes of another divine creature. So shout out to Overly Sarcastic Productions. And yeah, why Hades is my favorite god, or Greek god. Actually cares about his wife, doesn't actively look for trouble. The only Greek god with a functional marriage, and has a three-headed dog. Oh, Cerberus. Or is it Cerberus? I can't remember. Yeah. True that. Yeah. The gods and goddesses and the pantheons and all that, they're all just reflections of us. You can call in their energy for real. They're entities that people the more energy you put towards thinking something is alive or real or basically just an extension of yourself makes it a deity. So it's just like, even like you could like you see it, you can like, oh man, I don't want to get deep. I'd rather just talk about it like in a video, which I've had before, to explain it and not just do it in a reaction video. But just they're reflections of us. So to be honest, it's like, it's really how you feel about the story, because where do you think mythologies were born from? Basically, you make your own mythology. That's what like certain games show us, or certain universes. Basically, like the best example of this is Critical Role for me right now, to like pull as an example, like Exandria and the whole world of Exandria that Matt Mercer whipped up, all the gods and goddesses from there. They're real deities that people could actually call upon. It's actually a whole mythology now. And yeah, you can't deny that it's not, because this is the very, it's like the very fundamentals of how most mythology came to be anyways. It's literally just people really calling on something from the other side, just like chatting with the divine. But also more than that I'm not kind of like getting into. Nonetheless, much love and moonlight. I will see you in the next part of this, and yeah, peace.